everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Welcome to Novels Wonderland. DanMachi. Why am I being crowned the Lord of Cinder? Chapter 112 to 123. Chapter 112, setting the bait in a gamble, then Loki takes the hook. 1402 words. The war game between the Hestia Familia and the Apollo Familia. For Loki, there actually was not that much interest. Although she had some conflicts with the little dwarf, they had, after all, looked at each other in the heavens for so long. It had not reached the point of taking pleasure in her misfortune. As for the result, she had to admit that shortening the world record to half a month, if she had not witnessed it with her own eyes, she would probably have thought that Ron was some kind of freak. But even so, Loki still did not believe that the Hestia Familia to which Ron belonged had any hope of victory. He. At this kind of ball, couldn't they hold a few more of them? Holding a bottle of wine, even while lazily lying on the sofa beside the banquet hall, no deity dared to tease or criticize Loki's behavior with words. When her entire familia began its expedition. Especially after all her pocket money had been spent on buying wine, her quality of life began to decline in a straight line. Apollo's ball, on the other hand, barely satisfied her craving. Only, when the most well-capitalized presence in the entire venue, who was also her friend Hephaestus, stepped onto the stage of the banquet hall and announced, in her own name, the opening of this gamble, Loki could not help but sit up from the sofa. Drinking was fine. But she had never once entertained the idea of participating in a godly gambling pool. Yet this time the situation was truly different, especially when she heard that the odds for betting on the Apollo Familia as the victor of the wargame were as high as 1:2. Drool dripped from the corner of Loki's mouth. Why does it feel like that fellow Hephaestus is doing charity? As for the odds of betting on the Hestia Familia and Ron achieving victory, even when they reached 1:5, she did not produce the slightest thought of placing a bet. If her own familia had not already begun its expedition, after sounding things out with Hephaestus, Loki would not have minded acting as the bookmaker. After all, Hestia had already been driven out of Orrerio. If that were the case, who would she mock in the future? Finn and the others. It will take at least half a month before they return. The key point is that the gains from the Familia's expedition may not necessarily offset the overall battle losses. We are still very short of money. As a god, I must at least do something for the children, right? Thinking of this, Loki rose from the sofa and went to find Hephaestus, who was about to leave in the distance. As for the source of the betting funds, she had already thought of a way to resolve it. Pawn off the equipment in the Familia that could not be used. At the very least, that could bring back a bet of 5 million Valis. As long as they waited for the wargame to end, they would reap 10 million Valis, a profit guaranteed without loss. Hephaestus, rubbing her hands together, she naturally stopped her friend by the shoulder. What you mentioned earlier about opening a gambling pool for the wargame between the Apollo Familia and the Hestia Familia, is that true? Of course. I can't take out that much money for the time being. Could I mortgage the equipment the Familia doesn't need to you, and you can convert it into Valis at a discounted market price? As expected, this fellow still could not hold back. It was not that Hephaestus was setting Loki up to trick her. Even as a god, she could not guess the result. She was merely acting on her trust in Ron. Even if the outcome truly proved unsatisfactory, this gambling pool could be regarded as a farewell ceremony held for her close friend Hestia. No problem. The minimum bet starts at 10 million Valis. Who do you want to wager on? At this point, Hephaestus casually took out the thick stack of Adventurers Guild deposit slips she had collected, all in denominations of 10 million. From an ideal standpoint, I would rather recommend betting on the Hestia Familia. The risk of this gamble is high, but as long as you win, the return will definitely be doubled. The starting capital was already 10 million. Even if she pawned off all the equipment at the very bottom of the Familia's chest, she still would not be able to gather that many Valis. Faced with her friend Hephaestus's reminder, Loki was filled with hesitation. Can you reveal a bit of information? No. But the Hestia Familia currently has only 2 LV2 members, and they can also seek assistance from an external helper in Orrerio who does not belong to any Familia faction. In Orario, any adventurer whose strength exceeded LV3 basically had an affiliation with a familia. Even if Ron truly managed to find an LV3 adventurer to assist, placed before the Apollo familia, it would still be entirely insufficient. This kind of gambling pool not only allowed one to watch the spectacle, but more importantly, one could make money from it. In the end, she cast a pleading gaze toward Hephaestus and implored, "Then could you lend me some money?" Things were developing in the direction she had anticipated. The bait cast earlier by those gods had been quite effective. Hephaestus had even told her friend before her about her own speculation regarding the outcome. But the final choice still rested in Loki's hands. "How much do you want?" "Just playing around a little. Lend me 25 million valis. Those pieces of equipment we don't need for the time being can also be pawned for 5 million. That makes a total of 30 million. It was equivalent to making something out of nothing. From the standpoint of strength, she truly could not see any possibility of the Apollo familia losing. With a simple turnover, she could freeload 30 million valis. As for Hestia, she could only wish her good luck. For once, Loki did not narrow her eyes. After weighing it for a moment, she finally made her decision and declared firmly, "I bet on the Apollo familia to win." As if thinking of something, she cast a verifying glance toward Hephaestus. "Can I place bets on both sides at the same time?" Forget I said that." Having her attempt to exploit a loophole exposed, Loki shrugged in regret. "Write an IOU. No problem." The ball concluded smoothly. As Apollo looked at the banquet hall, now in complete disarray, there was not the slightest joy in his heart from Hestia having accepted the wargame. Instead, the series of developments that defied common sense had even made him begin to doubt himself. Hestia, who had clearly been unwilling to accept the wargame, had, under her friend's mediation and his own concessions, agreed to it very readily. She had even directly opened a gambling pool for the wargame at the banquet. It feels like it was premeditated? Once the seed of suspicion sprouted in his heart, it spread uncontrollably. This was undoubtedly a gamble of enormous stakes. The price of victory would be seizing Ron. Failure. The familia he had built over these years, every member and every asset, would all belong to Hestia. Apollo's agitation at this moment was nearly reaching its peak. He knew that he must now guard against any special contingencies. With that thought, he called out into the empty banquet hall, "Hyacinthos. Lord Apollo, I am here." A tall, slender young man whose beauty surpassed that of an elf stepped forward before the god Apollo, as if appearing from the corner of the staircase like a shadow. The jealousy in his eyes was well concealed. But even more so, there was Hyacinthos' admiration and love for his god. And as a benevolent god, Apollo greatly enjoyed that feeling. What he could not understand was why Ron was so resistant to him. He said in a low voice, "Before the wargame begins, keep watch over Hestia and Ron's movements, including the adventurers they come into contact with." "Absolutely, absolutely. Prevent any development that could lead to the failure of the wargame. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 113, Under the Moonlight, a dialogue between a boy and a goddess. 1,328 words. Are the daily lives of those large familias always this extravagant? Even with the interlude of the wargame, neither Hestia nor Ron left midway. It was only after they had completely filled their stomachs that they finally departed. Walking once more along the streets of Orario, when the girl recalled that exceedingly lavish banquet, filled with every kind of delicacy from land and sea, her heart brimmed with emotion. And because she had drunk red wine at the time, she naturally held Ron's hand. Compared to the smooth skin of his palm at the very beginning, after this period of high-intensity training in the dungeon, one could clearly feel the calluses that had formed at the base of his thumb. Extremely reliable. Even Hestia's mood calmed considerably. Maybe. Once this turmoil completely comes to an end, Ron, we should be able to return to a normal state, right? During the day you'll explore the dungeon, and I'll go work part-time. In the evening, after returning home, we'll sit together and have dinner." Recalling the time when Ron had just become an adventurer, her eyes were filled with longing. There had been no need to consider any other factors. Each of them had their own plans and arrangements, and in the end they would return to their warm lodging to huddle together for comfort. But what about now? Hestia's heart carried an indescribable complexity. The dungeon crisis from some time ago, which Ron had not explained in detail, and now, the war game known to most of the gods in Orario. Troubles, one after another. In the final analysis, it was because she, as a goddess, had been inadequate, forcing him to shoulder all the burdens and drag the Familia forward in Orario just to continue existing. "I don't know whether this conflicts with your dream of becoming an adventurer, Ron." The girl's sorrow was as gentle as the late-night breeze, voicing the guilt in her heart. But the only response she received was the steadily rising warmth of their clasped hands. Looking at him as he suddenly stopped in his tracks at Ron, who should have been at the age of high spirits, yet revealed a maturity that did not belong to this stage of life, with his straight back and relaxed smile. Hestia murmured softly, "Will you regret it?" "I have never regretted it." A person will ultimately strive for their ideals and beliefs for a lifetime. If the journey were always smooth, then one would surely miss the scenery along the way. To be honest, having experienced far too many things in his previous life, it was difficult for Ron, returned to his youth, to feel hot-blooded enthusiasm. Yet the girl's guilty murmur seemed to awaken something within him. It truly ignited. His tone was matter-of-fact as he stated the answer in his heart: only by holding fast to one's convictions can one cut through thorns, overcome every difficulty, and reach the end. What's more, the Apollo Familia isn't qualified to make me regret anything. Then what is your ideal, Ron? Sensing the weight within his words, Hestia met the boy's gaze directly. She had never heard Ron speak of his own ideal. Only, these words were destined to receive no answer. Perhaps within Ron's blazing eyes, and in the reflection of herself mirrored in his clear light brown gaze, the boy's so-called ideal was already within arm's reach. Could it be me? The girl's slightly childish fair cheeks flushed red, whether from the faint tipsiness of the wine or from finally recognizing that feeling deep within her heart. A feeling she could never possibly relinquish. Watching Ron smile and gently nod in affirmation, Hestia rose lightly onto her toes. After all, the difference in their heights was there. She could only cross her arms and affectionately wrap them around Ron's neck. Not until Ron took the initiative to bend down closer to her did she gently press her forehead against his. When their gazes met, neither of them looked away. I'm very happy. The war game between the Apollo Familia and the Hestia Familia naturally stirred up quite a commotion in Orario. The former's reputation in the Labyrinth City was by no means low, thanks in part to the distinctive preferences of its god. As for the latter, only a small number of adventurers even knew of it. And even those who did merely felt fortunate that, some time ago, they had not accepted Hestia's invitation to join her newly formed familia. Not only that, even Orario's large and small casinos had opened betting pools for this wargame. But none of this had the slightest relation to Ron. After all of his assets had already been wagered on his own victory in Hephaestus's betting pool. As for the time before the wargame began, his life did not change in the slightest. Each day he went to the dungeon to carry out high-intensity exploration, leaving early and returning late. Even when he came back to Orario in the evening to rest and reorganize, after only a brief pause, he would set out once more. At the very beginning, members of the Apollo Familia had followed Ron's movements, until they confirmed that during this period he was simply soaking himself in the dungeon. Only then did they completely abandon their futile surveillance. In Hyacinthos's words, to think that in such a short amount of time you could gain strength comparable to the Apollo Familia is nothing but a fool's dream. To this, Ron offered no comment. After shedding countless drops of sweat in the dungeon, he finally completely eradicated the special monsters on the 11th and 12th floors. Total time spent, 5 days. What was somewhat regrettable was that he had not encountered special existences such as a floor boss. Otherwise, in terms of great achievements, he might have reached the degree required for a level ascension. Very good. As for the middle floors of the dungeon, we'll explore them another time. Gazing at the stairway passage before him, that familiar sensation once again surged within Ron's heart. The deep tunnel, whose end could not be seen, contained a danger that made the hairs on his arms stand on end for no apparent reason. Compared to when he had first encountered a goblin guard on the first floor, this feeling was unprecedentedly intense. Perhaps the dungeon believed that relying solely on the monsters of the upper floors was simply not enough to kill him, and was preparing to raise the difficulty for him in the middle floors? After all, once one passed beyond the 12th floor, the subsequent floors were referred to as the first death line. The difficulty would increase sharply. With the current size of his party, he truly had no desire to explore further. The upper floors of the dungeon alone, with their extremely large numbers of souls-like monsters and their exceedingly punishing mechanics, had already caused Ron no small amount of trouble. This period of grinding in the dungeon had been preparation for the wargame. He could hardly let himself be ganked by a difficulty spike in the dungeon before it even began. Most crucially, all of his revival uses had been consumed in the monster's successive waves of battle. Noticing beside him the girl whose body radiated intense fighting spirit, eager to explore the middle floors and utterly unaware of the danger lurking in the depths, having a familiar member with ambition was a good thing. Still, Ron could not help but remind her, the intensity of our dungeon exploration during this period has already been maxed out. Next, let's return to Ororio first. To update our ability values. And then, for this final day, you can treat it as rest, or as preparation to welcome the wargame of the Apollo Familia. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 114, just as I'm ready to fight to the death, a goddess wants to elope with me? 1,385 words. At the very top of Babel Tower. The emergence of the wargame led to a temporary postponement of the Gods' Council, including the selection of titles for the newly promoted Level 2 adventurers. Even so, the scene remained extraordinarily lively. Even gods who normally had no interest whatsoever in such meetings chose to gather here now, waiting for the result of the draw. In the end, it all stemmed from Hephaestus's wager. After the news completely spread throughout Ororio, quite a few gods even staked all their savings to participate. The odds had not changed. The vast majority of the gods believed that the Hestia Familia had absolutely no chance of victory. Yet even so, there were still high-stakes gamblers who chose to bet on her. This drawing ceremony would be the final verdict for that wager. Siege battle. Tournament battle. The disparity in the size of the Familius was plain to see. No matter which victory condition was drawn, there was no real advantage for the Hestia Familia. As a participating Familia in the wargame, Hestia naturally had to be present. Due to her Familia's rank, she was assigned a position near the outer perimeter, but that did nothing to prevent her from becoming the focus of the assembled gods. As for the upcoming wargame drawing ceremony, she only hoped that victory could be decided in the form of a tournament battle. At this stage, that was the most favorable condition for her Familia to defeat the Apollo Familia. I hope it's a tournament battle. The girl clenched her hands tightly into fists. After leaving the ball banquet hosted by Apollo, that conversation beneath the moonlight had made Hestia fully recognize the feelings deep within her heart toward Ron, feelings that had long since surpassed those of family. Even so, in their daily interactions over the past few days, the two of them had tacitly avoided piercing that final veil. Yet in certain ways, they had already grown even closer. The reason behind it was most likely because the wargame had not yet been completely resolved. As long as victory is decided through a tournament battle, even if it means marrying Ron on the spot immediately, I'd be willing to do it. I am Ganesha. As the supervisor of this wargame, the elephant god Ganesha arrived at the Gods' Council. The remaining murmurs of discussion gradually subsided. He did not even need a microphone. Ganesha's loud and resounding catchphrase echoed in the ears of the assembled gods. When it came to presiding over such games, he always showed the utmost enthusiasm. Without any unnecessary preamble, he stepped onto the table. Beside him, inside a box, were the methods that would determine the wargame. I presume everyone present has come for the drawing. I won't waste any more time here. To ensure the fairness of the draw, I, as the supervisor, will not participate. Loki will draw the method that will decide the war game. No god questioned Ganesha's arrangement. As for Loki, who took on the responsibility of the drawing ceremony, when she walked up to the box, her gaze unconsciously flicked toward Hestia in the distance, whose face was filled with worry. Sorry. After silently expressing her apology in her heart, she reached her hand into the black box, gave it a brief stir, and selected the round capsule containing the slip of paper. After all, this involved the wager she had joined with Hephaestus. A full 30 million Valis was at stake. Even Loki could not help but grow tense. Under the expectant gazes of the countless gods present, she opened the pure white capsule in her hand. She unfolded the slip of paper. The battle format that came into view instantly filled her with relief, as though she had seen the dawn of victory. A smile spread across Loki's face. It's in the bag. Thus, before the countless gods gathered in Rio, she declared, in the name of Loki, I swear that there has been no falsehood or deception in the wargame drawing ceremony. The final result is a siege battle. How did she even return to the collective dormitory? In a daze. Hestia herself did not know. Even her close friend Hephaestus, upon learning that the result was a siege battle, had rarely given herself 2 days off. She was probably at a loss for how to comfort her. Even though she unconditionally trusted Ron's talent and strength, what stood before them was an overwhelming disparity in familia power. 100 versus 3. The cruel reality made it difficult for Hestia to feel confident. After all, she still did not know the exact strength of that external reinforcer, she had not even met him yet. Why? Can't our luck be a little better? Hestia had even thought that once this wargame was over, she would properly develop her familia, so that Ron would not have to shoulder so much on his own. It felt as though fate was playing a joke on her. Until the girl saw Ron, who had returned early from his dungeon exploration and was waiting for her at home, she forced a gentle smile, suppressing her disappointment. During this period, he had been leaving early and returning late. Hestia had seen it all and knew that Ron had been silently putting in the effort. Yet now, she did not even know how to tell him the worst possible result. Perhaps eloping would be the best choice? Ron! How about we pack up our things and find a place where no one can find us, and forfeit this wargame? She blinked. If they ran away before the wargame, they would definitely be ridiculed by those gods. Even Hephaestus would likely be implicated because of her actions. But aside from that, Hestia could not think of any other solution. We're ready to fight to the death, yet the goddess is thinking about running away with the bucket? Even without Hestia explaining, Ron had already guessed that the method chosen to determine the wargame's outcome was not particularly ideal. Facing the girl's proposal, he gently shook his head, his tone firm. It hasn't come to that. But, a siege battle. The disparity in familia numbers is right there. Even if you find a level 3 external supporter, it still wouldn't be enough to turn the tide. As for the specific information about Ryu, during this period, Ron had been rooted in the dungeon, accumulating experience. By the time he returned to the familia residence, it was nearly dawn, and he had not found a good opportunity to explain things to her. After all, without the perspective of a transmigrator, an ordinary adventurer would have no way of knowing that Ryu from the hostess of fertility was the adventurer Gale from 5 years ago. Seeing the worry written all over Hestia's face, he had to give the goddess who unconditionally supported him some confidence. After thinking for a moment, he chose to be honest. From a purely strength-based perspective, that senior who's willing to help me is truly very powerful. Even me, as I am now. I might not necessarily be able to defeat her in a real fight. Whether it's technique or combat style, the gap between us feels like at least 2 levels. It was a blunt and painful truth. There's someone even stronger? Hestia's previously solemn expression instantly froze. She knew Ron was not lying. So that meant that even with the wargame being decided through a siege battle, there was still a chance at victory? Right after that, her hand was gently taken. When she was led to the bedside, she saw Ron remove his white shirt and lie down on the bed with practiced ease. Just as she hesitated, wondering whether she should lie down as well, she saw the confident smile on Ron's profile. Besides, the Apollo Familia isn't worth us running away. I'm more curious to see how much my ability values have improved after these past days of training. So he just wanted to update his status. Not that. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 115, Updating Ability Values, Makoto's Choice. 1,353 words. Ron. Level, LV2. Strength, SS 1056. Endurance, SSS 1257. Dexterity, S 930. Agility, SS 1001. Magic, SS 1026. Even though Hestia had already prepared herself mentally countless times, when she truly saw the qualitative leap in Ron's ability values, the girl's mood at this moment was extraordinarily complex. Like riding a roller coaster, relying on outside assistance, at least in her view, was never truly secure. In the end, the only thing one could rely on was oneself. And as it happened, Ron's ability values, infinitely close to LV3, brought Hestia immense comfort. The speed at which these ability values are increasing, isn't it a bit too outrageous? Although she understood that these increases were the result of Ron squeezing out every bit of his spare time, barely even resting. That only by putting in several times the effort of ordinary people in the dungeon had he achieved this result. Even so, Hestia's heart was still filled with shock. Counting from the moment he broke through to LV2, and adding the first few days of training in Orario. Up to now, only half a month had passed. If not for the fact that he was still slightly lacking in terms of the great feat required for a breakthrough, then the miracle Ron would have created would have been using just 1 month in total to go directly from a rookie adventurer to a high-class adventurer, crossing ranks in a single leap. As for skills and magic, there were no particularly large changes. After reviewing everything, Hestia skillfully locked away Ron's extraordinary ability values. Leaning against the edge of the bed, if that powerful outside assistance had eased her initial nervousness, then at this stage, the overall strength Ron possessed was a true reassurance. The gap in numbers is simply too large. I never imagined you would put in so much effort for this wargame, Ron. Hestia sat on the edge of the bed, swinging her fair legs. Actually, she didn't think the option of eloping was all that bad. If they could cast aside all concerns, it might not be a bad choice, at least there wouldn't be so many girls surrounding Ron. The Apollo Familia. Their strongest member is their captain, Hyacinthos Cleo, who is LV3. They have around 13 LV2 adventurers. The rest are all LV1. This was the intelligence Hestia had gathered during this time, and one of the few ways she could help Ron. Their overall quality was indeed uneven. This was also where the advantage of a duel format lay. At least in a relatively fair, consecutive battle environment, both Ron and Makoto would still have the possibility of obtaining victory through combat technique. It's just that in a siege battle, with the number of Apollo Familia adventurers laid out like this, it feels as though no matter what tactics we devise, they won't have any effect. Ron slipped the white shirt back over his shoulders. After taking the parchment, he gave it a brief glance. The final increases in his various ability values were in line with his expectations. Even if he could undergo exaltation, he absolutely would not choose to do so before the wargame began. When he had exalted to LV2 back then, he had already spent quite some time fully adapting to the surge in strength. Moreover, his ability values had not yet reached their theoretical limits. He still needed to continue consolidating them. As for how to deal with the wargame, he thought carefully. With the 2 templates he currently possessed, Tarnished and Sekiro, at the very least, in single combat against Hyacinthos Cleo, he was not particularly worried. Purely from a numerical standpoint, he could definitely be considered well-rounded now. Decapitation. Defense is a slow death. When the time comes, we'll arrange for Makoto to protect Lady Hestia. I'll go with Senior Rio, who will be joining his support, and head straight for Apollo. As long as we deal with Hyacinthos. The other LV2 adventurers won't be enough to pose a threat. This was the only way Ron could think of to secure victory. After all, this was his Familia's wargame. There was no reason to make Ryu, who was assisting, serve as the main force. Otherwise, he and Makoto could simply ensure Hestia's safety. As for the Apollo Familia's adventurers, leaving them entirely to Ryu would merely be a matter of time. One should not underestimate the numerical suppression of raw power close to LV5, alright. The Senior Ryu you mentioned, is she the one from the restaurant? She used to be an adventurer. Recently, it's been Senior Ryu who has been guiding my practical combat techniques. At this point, Ron did not conceal it. However, he did not mention Ryu's past. As long as you have a plan, that's fine. No matter what, I'll support you. Hestia did not say much. She clapped her hands. As she stood up, there was inevitably a swell of motion. When her motivation returned, her mood brightened as well. Of course, she did not forget the other member of the Familia. Ron, go call Makoto over. I'll update her ability values first. It might be because the dungeon explorations have been so difficult, but Makoto's ability values have actually been increasing quite quickly. She thought of that hard-working black-haired girl. Hestia felt somewhat guilty. Her good friend Takumi Kazuchi had asked her to take good care of her, yet not long after transferring into the Familia, what awaited Makoto was an extremely cruel wargame. When she saw Makoto again, she greeted her with a smile. However, before updating her ability values, she pushed Ron out of the dorm room. The same procedure, Hestia was already very familiar with it. Only, after helping Makoto update her ability values, just as she was about to tell her about the wargame arrangements, she saw the girl, wearing a serious expression, make a request. Lady Hestia, there's something I may need to trouble you with. Are you thinking of transferring back to the Takumi Kazuchi Familia? Hestia had never seen such a serious expression on the girl before. Without thinking much, she could roughly guess what Makoto wanted to say. She did not find it surprising. Makoto had not been in her Familia for long, there was no reason to demand that she share hardship and adversity with them. Yet what happened next completely exceeded her expectations. Makoto placed the parchment engraved with her ability values on the edge of the bed. When she raised her head, the expression on her face was one of resolute determination. My various ability values have actually already reached the bottleneck of my own talent. Even if I continue training, the improvement brought would be minimal. So, I want to undergo level exaltation. To become a LV3 adventurer. In this wargame, which concerned whether the Familia would be dissolved or not, she wanted, as much as possible, to repay Ron, who had helped her, and the kind Lady Hestia, with whatever she was capable of giving. If Ron knew, he absolutely wouldn't allow you to do this. After all, the Familia's current situation isn't as bad as you imagine. Perhaps feeling that persuasion alone was insufficient, Hestia's tone grew more solemn than ever. I also don't want you to do this. I can reveal a little to you, about Ron's ability values. He only undergoes level exaltation after basically reaching the limit. Are you comparing me to a monster of talent like Ron? For a brief moment, the girl's emotions became especially complicated. She did not know whether she should feel honored or otherwise. After all, the intensity of their dungeon explorations had never decreased. Yet in terms of ability values, she had already reached her limit. At that thought, Makoto did not hesitate in the slightest. Her tone was filled with helplessness. If I had Ron's talent, I wouldn't have been stuck at LV2 for so long. So, please trouble yourself with my level exaltation, Lady Hestia. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 116, Chapter 116, Final Mobilization. 1,425 words. Since she was a female member of the Familia, when it came time to update ability values, Ron felt that he really did need to keep a certain distance out of propriety. However, he wasn't idle either. After switching the template to Sekiro, his updated ability values were about to reach their theoretical limit, and even the character save slot had advanced to LV2 along with it. Shinobi Prosthetic. This was the new ability Ron had mastered. Setting aside the core Healing Gourd and Ashinamushin Ryu swordsmanship, the Sekiro template had finally advanced to the stage where it could truly produce tangible effects. The good news. After acquiring the new ability, the price was not that his arm would mysteriously disappear. Instead, it was a fully improved arm guard that could be worn directly over his arm. As for why the character save slot had, for the first time ever, granted special equipment, he couldn't figure it out either. But since transmigration had already happened to him, and he even carried character save slots like Tarnished and Sekiro, it instantly started to feel reasonable. I have a feeling that in the upcoming wargame with Apollo, the mobility brought by the mechanisms of the Shinobi prosthetic will only be more effective than I originally expected. After all, aside from its core grappling hook function, the Shinobi prosthetic also contained 10 completely different Shinobi tools, similar to shuriken, a mechanical axe, and so on. Ron looked at the arm guard fitted over his arm. Its workmanship could only be described as simple and crude. At first glance, it looked like special equipment assembled from iron plates, bones, and various ropes, its appearance rather rough. As for why it could freely switch forms and contain so many Shinobi tool mechanisms, if you asked, the answer would be, the power brought by the Golden Finger. I really can't figure out how we're supposed to lose this wargame. With the wargame imminent, although the exploration of the dungeon had been temporarily halted, that didn't mean Ron could rest. After leaving the collective dormitory, he headed straight for the Hostess of Fertility. The most crucial step was none other than finding Ryu as their supporter. And without the Apollo Familia tailing him, Ron felt an unprecedented sense of ease. That thing was a nuclear weapon he had specially prepared for them. Arriving at the pub, there were fewer customers at noon, so the moment he walked up to the bar counter, he quickly became the focus of attention of the many girls in the restaurant, as well as the shop owner Mia and the others. Damn Apollo Familia. War game. After fermenting for a period of time, it had basically reached the point where most adventurers, and even the common people, knew about it, mainly because the Apollo Familia was famous enough. In addition, the few entertainment venues in Ororio, such as the casinos, had all opened betting pools. It did not cause Ron any particular trouble. Whether it was Hestia or himself, neither of them had any fame on the stage that was Ororio. But the Hostess of Fertility was different. When he broke through to LV2, the celebration banquet had been held here. Setting aside those gods, this was one of the few places that clearly knew which familia he belonged to. Aunt Mia, good afternoon. After skillfully placing his order, remembering that Hestia and Makoto had not eaten yet, Ron immediately added, "Please pack 2 portions of fish and chips, and 2 chicken stewed noodle set meals for me." All right. How much in total? When the topic turned to the price of the meal, Mia's motion of wiping the table paused slightly. As her gaze lingered on Ron's face, devoid of any tension, there was a hint of astonishment in her eyes. It was as if the wargame that had caused such an uproar in Ororio had nothing to do with the guy standing in front of her, leaving even Mia somewhat unable to grasp the situation. But that did not prevent her from maintaining a fairly good impression of this newcomer adventurer, who was earnest and hardworking, and even had a bit of ambiguous rapport with the waitresses. After thinking it over, it's on the house. But after you win this wargame, you have to come celebrate at my tavern. Kid. As the former captain of the Freya Familia, Mia understood that god Apollo's temperament. The reason for initiating the wargame was probably nothing more than taking a liking to the newcomer adventurer Ron upon seeing promising prey. As for the outcome? She actually could not say for certain, yet she still offered Ron her most sincere blessing. Thank you, Aunt Mia. There was nothing more inspiring than the goodwill of a senior adventurer. As for the few beautiful girls who exchanged glances but did not step forward, the foolish cat girl Anya, Chloe, and Seer, Ron swept his gaze over them and said in a relaxed tone, "When this farce is completely over, I'll definitely come celebrate at the pub. I'll treat you all to a meal then. We get a share of the victory banquet too, Naya?" It was just because she had been curious about the relationship between Ron and Ryu that she had ended up being scolded several times by the elf. So when she heard this guy say that once it was over he would treat her to a meal, Anya could not help but nudge Chloe beside her with her arm. With her carefree personality, a rare gleam flashed in her eyes. Compared to Ron being forced to join the Apollo Familia, whose overall reputation was difficult to evaluate. Wouldn't shipping Ron and Ryu be more interesting? We'll definitely win. The foolish catgirl's tone was extremely resolute. Yet when faced with Mia's warning-like gaze, Anya whistled and carried her tray toward the kitchen. Chloe, the Shotokan, went along with her. Having known each other for so long, there was no need to voice what they were thinking. After all, the war game had not yet begun, and accidental injuries were always a possibility. These girls. Fully aware of just how troublesome her staff could be, Mia was more helpless than anything. After pouring Ron a glass of sparkling orange juice, she said pointedly, "This kind of matter you should tell her yourself." I know. Talking with smart people really is easy. It's just a pity young people like you and Orario feel like they're becoming fewer and fewer. Lunch was soon served. Looking at the still aloof, keep your distance elf, Ron took a deep breath and, in the end, thick-skinned as he was, solemnly extended an invitation to Ryu for special training. Senior Ryu. But before he could finish, he received her response. I'll come find you when the time comes. Having long since made her decision, the girl would not regret lending a hand to Ron, who was half a disciple to her. After a slight hesitation, her brows and eyes gradually softened, like solid ice slowly melting. Calmly, she added, if you have time tomorrow, bring the other member of your familia as well, consider it special training for you. Anya and the others used to be fairly capable adventurers. Make as many preparations as possible. In this world, connections mattered. Ron nodded heavily and directly agreed on Makoto's behalf. Thank you, Senior Ryu. Without you, the war game would probably be extremely difficult. It felt somewhat cheesy. Especially under the boy's sincere gaze, Ryu slightly turned her face and shifted the topic. I understand the specific details. Victory will be decided through siege warfare. Do you have any ideas? Defense is a slow death. We have to take the initiative, launch a direct decapitation strike and give the Apollo Familia a taste of a newcomer adventurer's shock. From a rational standpoint, the elf girl believed this tactic to be extremely risky. Yet when she noticed the confident smile on Ron's face, the initial immaturity gradually transformed into steadiness. At last, he no longer seemed as reckless as when they first met. Ryu chose to believe in him. The corners of her eyes curved slightly, and a rare faint smile appeared. I'm looking forward to it. In the name of the Hestia Familia, Ron would, in this war game that concerned their very survival, compose a brand new chapter of his own as an adventurer. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 117, Chapter 117, The Reason We Absolutely Cannot Lose. 1,353 words. After packing Hestia's and Makoto's lunches, Ron did not linger in the restaurant. Besides bringing the food back, there was also the matter of pre-battle special training. However, just as he returned to the communal dormitory, he ran into the black-haired, long-haired girl stepping out of her room. Haven't eaten lunch yet, right? I packed 2 portions from the restaurant. Also, about the war game, starting tomorrow, we probably won't be able to rest for the time being. A few senior adventurers are willing to help us with special training. In the face of Apollo's war game, Makoto still showed no trace of retreat. Having come this far, she could be said to be a companion who shared both honor and disgrace. Ron felt there was no need to hide anything at all. When she heard that 2 senior adventurers were willing to help with her special training, a flash of brightness crossed Makoto's eyes. For her, this was indeed good news. After advancing to LV3, if she wanted to quickly adapt to the changes in strength brought about by the level up, this was the fastest way. Thank you. Ron, there's actually something I also wanted to tell you. It's just... I wanted to thank you for all the care you've given me in the dungeon during this time. Question mark. Why does this feel like it's heading in the wrong direction? Although Ron knew very well that, given Makoto's character, she would absolutely never do something like running away before the wargame began. Then, he heard the girl's matter-of-fact explanation, "I've been accumulating at LV2 for so long, and now I've finally completed my level up." Even the great feat was provided by the floor boss behind the fog gate. Although you are the captain of the Familia. But when it comes to adventurer level, setting aside the future, at least for now, I feel that I absolutely can't be surpassed by you, a rookie adventurer. Makoto's tone was light and casual. Even so, Ron could still grasp her true thoughts. She probably wanted to make a bit more effort for the extremely important wargame ahead. He was just about to say something, when he saw the girl pick up the packed lunch and return to her room. As if anticipating what he was about to ask, Makoto softly added, "Don't worry. As for my ability values, every attribute has already reached the limit of its potential." Compared to the speed of Makoto's growth in the original storyline under the oppressive pressure of the malice-filled Souls-like dungeon, she was the first to complete her level up. From an objective standpoint, even an adventurer who had just broken through to LV3 would undergo a qualitative change in strength. At the very least, the LV2 adventurers of the Apollo Familia would pose no pressure at all. But now, Ron had no intention of popping the champagne in advance. The rough reason was that he now had a reason why, no matter what, he absolutely could not lose. Shinobi prosthetic. In the narrow upper levels of the dungeon, it was difficult to fully bring out its effect. However, the wargame venue was located at the former headquarters of Epolis on South Main Street. The grappling hook's high mobility could be said to provide Ron's decapitation operation with a rapid means of movement. Ryu's special training was scheduled for tomorrow. Making use of the limited free time he had, he took the valise he had accumulated during this period from dungeon exploration and selling drop items, a total of 1.1 million, and carried out a retaliatory spending spree. The panacea he purchased was mainly prepared for Makoto, to prevent her from being injured during the wargame. Aside from that, there was the repair and maintenance of equipment and weapons. With the recovery from the healing gourd, Ron was not worried about injuries. Most importantly, the wargame was not aimed at slaughtering a Familia. Moreover, toward most of the Apollo Familia's adventurers, whom he had never seen before, he did not harbor as much resistance as he had when facing the Soma Familia. If he really had to evaluate it, it was simply a difference in stance. After enjoying a brief period of leisure time in Ororio, Ron soon arrived at the day before the wargame. As usual, he set out early in the morning with his pack on his back. This time, however, the destination was outside Ororio. The backyard of the Hostess of Fertility was simply unable to handle both his and Makoto's practical combat training at the same time, so they could only temporarily relocate. And then, Ron saw the girl who would be accompanying them. She was still wearing the leaf-colored maid uniform of the restaurant. Her short light brown hair and cat ears were extremely eye-catching, and her golden vertical pupils symbolized her identity as a catgirl. Anya. Senior Ryu. Anya is also here to help with your special training. We've sparred many times before, even if we continue fighting, we might not gain much more. And the combat styles between different adventurers vary greatly. When interacting in private, Ryu was not as cold as usual. After briefly explaining how the sparring would be arranged, she led them outside the city of Ororio, to the clearing beside the forest. Anya used to be a strong adventurer too, meow. If it weren't for the wargame rules allowing only one outside helper, Anya definitely wouldn't miss something this interesting. The silly catgirl made no attempt to hide the pride in her tone. It was just past dawn, and the girl stretched lazily. Because of that movement, her originally understated figure was perfectly outlined. She looked just like a docile kitten. But as Anya moved, the long spear hanging behind her back quietly slid downward. Just as it was about to touch the ground, the girl casually kicked backward, and sent the spear that was about to fall straight into her palm. Don't underestimate Anya, meow. After lightly loosening up, her expression gradually turned serious. Even her lazy golden vertical pupils now flowed with a fighting spirit called wildness. A former Freya Familia LV4 adventurer. At this stage, with his own ability values already close to breaking through to LV3, Ron was also curious about where the gap lay between himself and these veteran adventurers of Orario. After fitting the shinobi prosthetic onto his arm, he wore a relaxed smile, yet could clearly feel the fighting spirit coursing through his body. He said earnestly, "Senior Anya, then please take care of me." But the moment his words fell, the silly catgirl, who had still been standing at a distance, shot toward him like a cannonball. The naked eye could only catch the afterimage of her movement. Anya's speed was even faster than Ryu's, perhaps because of the unique talent of her cat-person race. There was no time at all for Ron to think. His body almost instinctively raised his left hand toward the forest to the side, accompanied by the sound of a mechanism activating. Click! The shinobi prosthetic fitted on his left arm instantly fired a grappling hook. After the tip firmly embedded itself into a tree trunk, accompanied by the powerful pulling force generated by the mechanism, Ron's legs exerted force in an instant, and his figure vanished from where he stood. Only the silly catgirl remained, having swept horizontally with the shaft of her spear, her attack completely missing. She stumbled and nearly fell to the ground. She was not annoyed in the slightest. To be precise, the boy's suddenly vanished figure triggered the underlying hunting logic of Anya's cat-person instincts. She looked toward the patch of forest where Ron had disappeared, her eyes filled with a desire for the game. Very interesting. Although the girl did not know how Ron had done it, in the years since she retired from the Freya Familia, she had not experienced such an interesting game. Hide-and-seek is Anya's favorite, meow. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 118, Chapter 118, the light in the girl's eyes completely shattered. 1,326 words. The practical combat training with Anya. Ron's goal was very simple: truly master the correct method of using the shinobi prosthetic, so that it could play a decisive role in the wargame. The results were, of course, excellent. Even when relying solely on bodily instinct to react, he was able to use the grappling hook to evade the attacks of a level 4 adventurer, not to mention that many shinobi tools had yet to be used. Standing within the shade of the trees, this could be considered early adaptation to the style of the wargame. He carefully observed the surrounding environment. Benefiting from the quiet atmosphere deep within the forest at dawn, when the sound of leaves being stepped on gradually reached his ears, he raised his hand once more. Shinobi tool, shuriken. As the arm guard continuously shifted, several shuriken were launched in an instant, sweeping forward with sharp, air-piercing whistles as they shot relentlessly toward Anya's direction. Bang! The effect of the shuriken was not particularly good. Only to see Anya's cat ears twitch lightly, allowing her to analyze the direction of the sneak attack from the hidden weapons. With a nimble figure like a mountain cat, she vanished from where she stood. When she appeared again, the silly catgirl had already dashed in front of Ron. Looks like Anya wins. She lightly licked her thin lips, yet in her eyes lingered the faint dissatisfaction that comes when a game ends. Considering that the strongest member of the Apollo Familia was only level 3 in strength, Anya did not attack. She did not even point the sharp spear tip at Ron. Instead, she swept the shaft of the spear toward the boy's abdomen. But the scene of Ron being sent flying did not appear as expected. Clang! At the moment of metal collision, a crisp and pleasant sound rang out. When truly prepared for battle, Ron gripped a short sword in his right hand. Facing the horizontal sweep of the spear shaft aimed at his abdomen, he blocked it from below upward. Thanks to the Ashinamushin Ryu swordsmanship, the girl's originally extremely swift movements seemed, in his eyes, as though someone had pressed a slow-motion button. He stepped forward, and as he deflected Anya's attack with his short sword. Clang! 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 After all, a long spear restricts flexibility. Even when Anya readied herself once more and launched another attack against Ron, what she faced was the boy's plain yet highly technical deflection strikes. It carried a strong sense of rhythm. But the silly catgirl had no feeling of appreciation whatsoever. She only felt an inexplicable irritation. even though every strike she launched was aimed at the blind spots of Ron's defense. Yet for some unknown reason, this guy could always see through her moves in advance. Is this really the strength a level 2 rookie adventurer can possess? Thinking that Ryu was still outside, Anya absolutely could not afford to be laughed at. Steadying her footing, she once again swung the spear body, its speed so fast that only blurred after images remained. Bang! With this spear at level 4 strength, Anya doesn't believe you can block it, meow. And in the face of true stat suppression. Compared to Ron and Makoto, who were constantly preparing for the wargame, the Apollo Familia, holding an overwhelming advantage in numbers, carried a somewhat more relaxed atmosphere. As the commander, Daphne was naturally the focus of the Familia meeting. Yet even now, she still could not understand why Hestia had agreed at the ball. In her view, the solution was very simple. Abandon Ron, and at least the Familia could continue developing normally in Orario. But by participating in the wargame, if they lost, they would be completely expelled from Orario. It was highly abnormal. Yet the intelligence that had been gathered caused Daphne to fall into deep thought. In front of Apollo and Hyacinthos, she slightly furrowed her brows. This is all the information regarding Ron. He has been in Orario for a total of only 1 month. He is currently a level 2 adventurer. Among his connections in Orario, the closest is Hephaestus. 10 days ago, the level 2 adventurer Yamato Makoto from the Takamikazuchi Familia converted and entered the Hestia Familia. And after the wargame was initiated, during this period Ron has been in the dungeon every day. Aside from necessities of food, clothing, and lodging, he has not come into contact with any adventurers. At least in Orario, the chances of finding a powerful adventurer who does not belong to any faction are extremely slim. Noticing the gradually relaxing brows of the god Apollo, Daphne felt an indescribable complexity in her heart. From her own perspective, she hoped Ron's resistance could truly have an effect. After all, it was something she herself had failed to accomplish at the time. Only, there was basically no hope to be seen now. As for tomorrow's wargame, since the Hestia Familia will be the attacking side, I believe we only need to focus on defense and dispatch adventurer squads to counterattack. Relying on the advantage in Familia size, this wargame should basically present no problems. No other Familia members raised any objections. Hyacinthos Cleo. Carry it out according to Daphne's arrangement. No matter what. There must not be any mistakes in this wargame. Ron is very important to me. In the end, Apollo made the final decision. After all, the wargame had been successfully initiated, and based on the intelligence gathered so far, there was no possibility of defeat for his Familia. He stood up. The preparations for the wargame will also be carried out by you, Daphne. Go to the sanatorium and purchase some panacea. When we win this wargame, do not let my Ron show even the slightest sign of injury. Hephaestus' sudden interference had indeed placed tremendous pressure on Apollo. But after truly learning that the other side had only 2 level 2s, even assuming the worst, that they found a level 4 adventurer, that still would absolutely not be enough to turn the tide of the battle. Thinking of Ron's exceedingly pleasing, delicate face, as well as the talent capable of astonishing the entire world even though he had not yet truly obtained him, Apollo could already imagine just how delightful that feeling would be. After receiving the god's orders, Daphne could only execute them strictly. Yet just as she left the manor, she saw her close friend timidly following behind. Cassandra. Looking at the deep worry in the girl's eyes, her own gaze was filled with helplessness. Cassandra, tomorrow is the wargame. As the healer of the Familia, you need to keep yourself in good condition. Upon hearing Daphne's reproach, the blue hair that had originally only covered the side of Cassandra's face now fell forward as she lowered her head, completely shrouding her features. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Recalling her judgment when she encountered Ron in the dungeon, she cautiously asked, "Does what we said earlier in the dungeon still count?" Which matter? Not participating in this wargame. The reason? I don't know how to explain it to you. It's just, the emblem that symbolizes the Familia, the golden bow, the sun, even the very existence of the Apollo Familia. It was completely destroyed. the girl's pupils trembled with fear. Even when she had followed the Familia on dungeon expeditions, she had never dreamed of such a terrifying scene. Noticing Daphne's tightly furrowed brows, a light called hope seemed to flicker in her eyes. Yet when she heard her close friend's slightly exasperated voice, shoulders shrugging helplessly. "What are you thinking? In this wargame, our Familia has absolutely no possibility of losing." Immediately after, the hope that had ignited in Cassandra's eyes shattered once more. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 119, Chapter 119, a predestined ending, and yet, miracles will still appear. 1,314 words. At the top floor of Babel Tower. War games taking place in Oraria were nothing unusual, but a war game between the Apollo Familia and the Hestia Familia was enough to gather countless gods here. And the reason that drew them was that a certain Hephaestus had opened a betting pool on this wargame, otherwise, they could have simply found somewhere else and watched through projection stones. If Ron were here, he would certainly be able to spot quite a few familiar faces on the scene. Freya, Loki, Hephaestus, and Hermes, wearing a hat, looking languid with his arms folded across his chest, all gathered because of this game. It feels like there's no suspense left in this bet, right? Even though the wargame had not yet begun, through the live feed, one could already see the Apollo Familia, fully armed and ready, having arrived at the site of the siege battle, their neatly uniformed attire especially eye-catching. Not only that, from the excited expressions on those adventurers' faces, one could see their intense fighting spirit. Sitting in her chair with her legs crossed like some old man, Loki narrowed her eyes as she looked toward the Apollo Familia in the image. Setting aside overall quality for the moment, at least in terms of numbers, it made her feel quite reassured. If she had money in her own pocket rather than betting funds borrowed from Hephaestus, she definitely would not have wagered on that bunch from the Apollo Familia. What fun was there in betting big with the small? Wasn't it far more interesting to believe in that slim hope and stage an upset to overturn the strong? It's not at the point where we can discuss the outcome yet. Hephaestus maintained a relaxed attitude. She did not care about the result of the bet at all. Whether victory or defeat, it would only amount to adding a 0 or 2 behind her already dull balance. Compared to that, what she truly looked forward to was whether Ron, whom she had watched grow from the stage of a rookie adventurer to where he stood now, could once again create a miracle. "You know him well?" Faced with Loki's question, and with the curious gaze cast by Freya beside her, Hephaestus finally experienced the pleasure of playing the Riddler and smiled as she shook her head. "I can only say that Apollo wanting to use the wargame to take Ron away is not without reason. After all, the theoretical limit-breaking ability values within the Fauna system spoke for themselves." She murmured softly, perhaps this wargame, which in most people's eyes has long had its outcome decided, might also see a miracle appear? Early morning. The wargame arrived as scheduled. Compared to the usual clear weather, the sky, now covered in dark clouds, seemed to lay a faintly tragic undertone over this wargame with such a disparity in strength. Having fully rested, this time Ron chose to travel light. He wore no armor, carrying only the greatsword Great Fortune, along with 2 fast-attack daggers. After all, this was not a dungeon expedition. And a wargame was not aimed at slaughtering the opponent's Familia. Once the target lost the ability to resist, it was essentially equivalent to forfeiting and withdrawing from the dispute. Standing at the entrance of the communal dormitory, just as Ron was about to head to the Hostess of Fertility to look for Rhea, the moment he stepped out the door, he saw a figure leaning against the wall, draped in a gray-brown cloak. Short light green hair, and that trace of cool aloofness. Her identity needed no further explanation. Senior Ryu. Recalling that farcical encounter in the dungeon, although she had joined the wargame initiated by the Apollo Familia only as a temporary companion, Ron smiled and teased, "Does this count as us being comrades fighting side by side?" Comrades fighting side by side. Ron's relaxed words tried to knock at Rhea's heart, yet she still had not let go of the tragedy from 5 years ago, the destruction of the Astrea Familia. The girl's face remained tense. "This is the last time." And noticing Hestia and Makoto approaching from a distance, Ryo gently shook her head. "As for words of thanks, let's wait until after the wargame ends." I'll go ahead to the battlefield and wait for you. All right. The disparity in familia numbers was laid out plainly. There was no need to formulate any plan. Even if the Apollo familia dispatched a level 2 adventurer, they might not necessarily be able to defeat Makoto after her level ascension. As for the rest, after becoming proficient in mastering the various abilities of the Sekiro template, Ron did not feel particularly nervous. What he felt more was a longing for battle. We should set out as well. If we don't arrive at the location within the stipulated time, it seems we'll be judged as having forfeited. He had no intention of letting all the effort he had put in during this time go to waste. Ron's gaze swept over Makoto before finally settling on Hestia. She was still wearing that familiar white dress only, compared to yesterday. The girl showed not the slightest trace of panic. After hearing the decision to set out, she naturally reached out and took Ron's hand on her own initiative. The smile blooming on her youthful face was especially bright and filled with trust. All right. I believe you can do it. Just like when you created that record that shook Orario, Ron. After this wargame ends, I'll wait for you to come and pick me up. There was no unnecessary elaboration. With Ron's mature and steady personality, there was no need to worry about safety. On the contrary, Hestia was concerned that the more she reminded him of things, the greater the psychological pressure it might place on him. Along the Adventurers Street, Ron and Hestia continued moving toward the southern main street of Orario. Perhaps because of this wargame, a highly conspicuous God and Familia entourage naturally drew the attention of passing adventurers. As for the skeptical talk from the crowd, Hestia's smile remained confident and composed. Her steps did not falter. After arriving at the abandoned southern main street, long neglected since the disappearance of the Evolus Familia, as far as the eye could see, the ruined walls of abandoned buildings lay collapsed in disarray. Their surfaces, battered by wind and rain, were already covered in thick moss, weeds grew everywhere, and the entire place was scarred and desolate. To be honest, in this kind of environment, it actually feels quite suitable for me to hide. Sensing the relatively heavy atmosphere within the Familia's group and not wanting Ron to shoulder too much pressure, Hestia showed no sign of worry. Instead, she joked about the surrounding environment. After choosing the church tower as the hiding place and clearing out a spot to stay, the hourglass hanging at the girl's waist indicated that the wargame's countdown was about to end. Looking once more at the grown boy standing before her, Hestia gently rose onto her toes, smoothing the wrinkles at the collar of Ron's shirt. In the end, she buried the reluctance and attachment in her eyes deep within her heart. She clapped her hands lightly, her tone firm. "Do your best." "I will. Makoto, I'm entrusting Lady Hestia to you." After hearing the specific arrangement, Makoto tightly gripped the hilt of her katana, her expression solemn as she nodded heavily. The wargame had already begun. Ron stepped forward, making no promises, only knowing clearly that in this wargame against the Apollo Familia, there were things he had to protect. Beautiful girls, and the Familia assets that had originally belonged to him. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 120, An Extremely Creative Battle. 1,345 words. After leaving the top floor of the abandoned church where Hestia was, Ron proceeded along South Main Street, ultimately heading straight toward the Apollo Familia's residence. However, the battle arrived even faster than he had anticipated. So fast? It seemed to be a pre-arranged deployment. Before he had gone very far, he noticed ahead of him, not too far away, a squad dressed in the Apollo Familia's uniform. Looking over, their number was roughly around 10. Most importantly, Ron did not find any familiar faces. They were all unfamiliar adventurers. As for the Apollo Familia's arrangement, he did not feel surprised. When holding an absolute numerical advantage, mobilizing the entire force instead would actually place the Apollo Familia in a passive position. The prudent solution was to have the core strength remain on guard while dispatching several adventurer squads to wage guerrilla warfare and conduct simple probing attacks. 1 versus 10? Ron unfastened the greatsword strapped to his back. Although the numerical disadvantage lay plainly before him when it came to truly clashing with adventurers, it only made his blood boil. Why fight? Simply because their positions were different. And when he noticed, at the other end of the abandoned South Main Street, the solitary adventurer carrying a massive greatsword, James Sullivan, serving as the Vanguard Squad's leader, wore a smile that was utterly unrestrained and brazen. Knowing the information about the Hestia Familia, without even asking, James could guess that this was precisely the ultimate target of this wargame Ron. At this moment, Lord Apollo was waiting for the result. The opportunity for advancement was right before him. No one could give up the chance to achieve merit and enter a god's line of sight. James showed not the slightest carelessness, on the contrary, his attitude was more solemn than ever, and he decisively said, "Follow the coordination we use when exploring the dungeon." I'm carrying a panacea on me. Defeat him at any cost. Just as he was making battle arrangements, the adventurer standing in the distance removed the greatsword strapped to his back and, as if treating it like a thrown weapon, hurled it out. It smashed toward their side at a speed visible to the naked eye. So he really is a newbie. What kind of normal adventurer throws their weapon when fighting? Richard shook his head lightly. He could not understand why Lord Apollo was so fixated on such a brat. But the scene that unfolded next caused his pupils to contract. The special arm guard covering the black-haired boy's arm operated along with the mechanism. Click! A grappling claw shot out. At a speed difficult to track with the naked eye, carrying a rope, it shot toward the greatsword that had been thrown, precisely striking the scabbard of the greatsword and performing a simple entanglement. Using the exaggerated weight of the greatsword Great Fortune as the grappling claw's forward anchor point. And Ron, holding a short sword in one hand, with the pulling force generated by the rope's retraction, along with the explosive power brought by his various exaggerated stats, his agile figure resembled a cheetah charging deep into a flock of sheep. The greatsword did not crash into the crowd of adventurers. Carrying the grappling claw, after helping Ron complete the rapid advance, it returned once more before the boy due to the retracting rope. His left hand gripped the hilt. He easily drew out Great Fortune, which had briefly hovered in midair. As for the scabbard that had been flung high into the air in front of him, Ron paid it no heed. The power accumulated in his legs erupted, causing spiderweb-like cracks to appear on the ground as he instantly dashed before James. Noticing the horrified expressions of the Apollo Familia adventurers, Ron lowered his stance. His left hand brushed across the blade of the greatsword Great Fortune, and the blood that cut through his skin bestowed upon the weapon an extremely sinister glow. Combat Art, Bloody Slash. The crimson sword light that was swiftly slashed out, sweeping with momentum capable of tearing through everything, surged horizontally toward the tightly clustered Apollo Familia adventurers before him. The first to be struck was the captain, James. Even though beneath the Familia uniform he wore thick protection, at the moment his body came into contact with the slash, he felt an irresistible force. Not only did it break through the defense, even the scene within James's vision began continuously receding. Is this power something a level 2 adventurer can possess? Only when his body heavily smashed onto the ground and warm blood slowly flowed from his chest did the intense pain finally cause his blank thoughts to gradually return. James wanted to prop himself up by bracing a hand against the ground, but he only felt as if all the bones in his body were about to fall apart. He was utterly unable to carry out any command. What followed was Ron's one-sided crushing assault. This guy's speed was simply too fast even, it could be described as inconceivable. By using the thrown greatsword as a weapon to rapidly close what had originally been a 50-meter safe distance, along with that large-scale, eerie crimson slash. As a level 2 adventurer, James was naturally the strongest among the members to be able to become the captain. Yet even he had been unable to react, let alone the other members. The massive loss of blood made him feel only drowsiness. And at that moment, as the boy in the distance picked up the scabbard and passed beyond the Familia adventurers, constantly drawing closer, a sense of mortal danger surged in his heart. Then, James saw Ron's lone figure, without any pause, continuously stepping forward in the direction where Lord Apollo was. He had survived. But what difference was there between his current self and a cripple? We lost. Choosing the bell tower on the top floor of the abandoned church as the base camp for the assault battle had a simple reason. The extremely wide field of view allowed Hestia and Makoto to observe all movements in the current South District, enabling them to make better judgments about the situation. Without a commander, this was the only way they could act. Naturally, the battle occurring not far ahead entered Hestia's line of sight. Yet when it truly came to such a moment, she instead did not dare to look. Battle required paying a price. She did not wish to see, even if the possibility was low, it still existed, the scenario of Ron being injured. If she were to witness such a scene with her own eyes, she was very worried that she would be unable to resist making the decision to terminate the wargame. Until Makoto's reminder, containing complex emotions, reached her ears, Lady Hestia, Ron's battle with the Apollo adventurers has ended. Who won? Ron. It was a one-sided slaughter. Even having witnessed it with her own eyes, she found it difficult to connect such an extremely creative fighting style with the Ron who normally explored the dungeon. Was this truly the same person? The combat methods he possesses, including his strength, are only more exaggerated than we imagined. The gap would not be widened merely because of level, this was Makoto's final conclusion. After all, he is Ron. Standing once more before the bell tower's window, the girl looked out. Within her sight, Ron's figure was no longer visible, only the adventurers lying scattered in disarray on the ground in the distance, their life or death unknown. The first battle was victorious, dispersing the gloom that had shrouded the depths of her heart. Yet the heavy dark clouds in the sky did not clear because of it, instead, in the shifting wind, they surged even more wildly. Black clouds pressed upon the city, hundreds of grasses danced in the north wind. Hestia's heart was fixed upon the one advancing ahead. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 121, Chapter 121, An Unpredictable Battle Situation, Loki's Concern. 1,290 words. James's adventurer team has now completely lost contact. Within the wargame, familiars with sufficient financial means generally use special communication items to ensure that the Apollo Familia maintains an absolute advantage during battle. As a god, Apollo did not stint. These communication items were naturally distributed to each adventurer team, so that Daphne, as the commander, could better coordinate the deployment of the adventurers. Before engaging in battle, requiring each adventurer captain to report their situation was a rule set in advance. And when she heard that James had encountered the main force of the Hestia Familia Ron, she began paying attention. But no matter how she attempted to call out afterward, James made no response at all. Daphne then realized that the battle had already ended, and even the victor was Ron, who had never been favored. She had to come up with a countermeasure. After thinking for a moment, she looked toward the map of Orario. Miller. Stanley. Change direction. Take your teams to the southern Main Street and intercept Ron. He has already broken through James's team and is advancing toward the Familia's residence. Understood. Understood. The member called Miller led the largest number of adventurers. His role was to quickly bring his team close to provide support once Ron's whereabouts were discovered, to prevent the opponent from concealing his true strength. After all, could Ron, who was only LV2, simultaneously withstand the siege of dozens of adventurers? The answer was, of course, no. After receiving Daphne's orders, Miller did not show much resistance. Executing the commander's assigned tactics was precisely what they were required to do. The commander is like that. She only needs to stand behind the scenes and direct us in participating in the wargame, while we, the combat members, have many more things to consider. Target the southern Main Street, intercept the prey. However, just as Miller and the group of adventurers circled out of the abandoned alley and were rapidly closing in on the southern Main Street where Ron was located, ahead in the distance, a figure wearing a gray-brown cloak stood upright. As a strong wind swept past and blew back the hood atop the girl's head, what appeared before Miller and the others were the fairy's eyes, cold and clear like an iceberg. There were no words, only that trace of killing intent flowing through the air. If I'm not mistaken, this fellow should be a supporter of the Hestia Familia? Noticing the wooden katana the unfamiliar elven girl had drawn from her waist, Miller's gaze sank to the depths. Before the clash had even begun, he could already feel the pressure brought by her strength from this unfamiliar adventurer. His mood was extremely complicated. It seems that, for the time being, we won't be able to reach the southern Main Street. I told you. As for Ron, I won't comment on his other aspects for now, but when it comes to creating miracles, I've never once doubted his ability. As a Familia member, if he could even harbor those kinds of thoughts toward Hestia, a goddess, then what was there that he couldn't do? Looking at the scene before her, Hephaestus's smile was filled with teasing. When Ron first encountered members of the Apollo Familia and battle broke out. Then, with a fighting style that could make even the gods' eyes light up, he crushed them like dry branches and rotten wood. As for the outcome of the war game, she had already made her judgment in her heart. Compared to the final gains of the wager, Hephaestus's gaze swept around. What she was more curious about was how these idol gods would react. He does indeed have considerable combat talent. In some respects, it's even more eye-catching than the talent he possesses. It seems he's an interesting new adventurer. The one giving this evaluation was Freya. On the battlefield wastelands, she had witnessed no small number of battles. Yet Ron's particular style was more akin to a ninja from the Far East. It was just a pity that the radiance of his soul was far too mottled, the trace of appreciation in her eyes gradually faded. And when, at the top level of Ororio, the gods, regardless of stance or wager, had purely cheered for Ron, who was beginning to show his edge, and the applause gradually subsided, Freya looked toward Loki with interest. What do you think? It only proves that Ron is indeed an outstanding adventurer among LV2. I don't believe the Apollo Familia has no response at all. An exceptionally dazzling battle. Yet the smile of certainty hanging on Loki's face did not waver in the slightest. The Apollo Familia's chance of victory relied on their overwhelming number of adventurers. Most crucially, once the real fighting began, absolutely no one would be able to support Ron. And then, the magic projection shifted to a bird's-eye view of the southern district. Just as Loki had described, the nearby adventurers quickly took action. In total, 3 adventurer teams were heading to intercept Ron. However, when Miller's unit, the one with the largest number of adventurers, was stopped by the cloaked figure of an adventurer, even Loki sat up straight. Counting the number of members in the other 2 teams, even if the total came to 20 adventurers. Surely that many adventurers can't fail to stop Ron, right? Loki did not voice her inner speculation. In truth, even members of her own Familia might not be able to withstand so many adventurers at the same level. Even if the Apollo Familia's members were somewhat inflated in strength, under the same level conditions, facing the siege of 5 or 6 LV2 adventurers, achieving a swift victory would absolutely be extremely difficult, let alone with other adventurers assisting. There was no answer. All Loki felt was the silence in the air. When she looked toward her friend Hephaestus and saw that confident, composed expression on her face, the corner of her mouth twitched slightly. Surely, Ron isn't actually LV3. Including the wargame, the wager in which Hephaestus appeared to be acting charitably but was in fact determined to win, had it been a trap from beginning to end, just waiting for her to jump in with money? She could not help but form this suspicion in her heart. How could that be? Breaking through to LV2 in 16 days was already outrageous. Surely he couldn't have undergone another level ascension in just 10 short days? Loki admitted that she was indeed a little anxious. On the day of the banquet, when she heard Hephaestus's suggestion, she had briefly considered betting on Hestia. Even if the 5 million Valis mortgaged in equipment were to go down the drain, she would not have cared that much. But when the amount reached 30 million Valis, and she thought of the children in her Familia who were currently on an expedition, as a god, she could not possibly cause trouble at home as well. If the wager were won, she could earn that much money for nothing. But now? The unease deep within Loki's heart even surpassed her concern for the children of her Familia participating in the dungeon expedition. Her gaze was fixed tightly on the projection screen. As if to confirm her speculation, the magic shifted again. Immediately after, What entered the sight of all the gods at the top of Babel Tower was the airtight defensive line the Apollo Familia had formed on the southern main street after completing their regrouping. Ah! The upright, solitary figure of the boy who had halted his steps. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 122, Chapter 122, Advancing Toward Victory. 1,389 words. South Main Street. Behind it lay the passage connecting to the central plaza. The distance to where the god Apollo was located was less than 1,000 meters. It could be said to be the final line of defense. Of course, there were also quite a few adventurers inside the Familia's base waiting for Ron. Compared to these ordinary members, those people were the true elites. The key point was, Stanley did not believe that Ron could break through alone. Just the LV2 members who had arrived here numbered 5 in total. The rest, though LV1, frequently fought in the dungeon and excelled in coordination. Miller will be here to support us shortly. Besides, with so many of us, there's no reason we can't take Ron down, right? Unless Ron possessed strength at the LV3 level. But that was obviously impossible. Even LV2 adventurers were quite rare in Orario, let alone in this recent period in Orario. There had not been the slightest rumor about Ron. He's here. When Ron's figure appeared not far ahead, Stanley braced himself. He tightened his grip on the rapier in his hand, putting away the initial contempt he had harbored. To be able to quickly deal with James's squad. That meant that, under these circumstances, this guy's strength was absolutely among the best within the same level. Why does it feel like there are fewer adventurers here than the monsters the dungeon spawns? They were clearly blocking the road. But based on the battle just now, the feeling it gave Ron was roughly speaking not even as oppressive as those sinister monsters in the dungeon? Logically, that shouldn't be the case. As adventurers, their combat thinking was certainly different from monsters that did not use their brains and only fought with all their might. It was also possible that the ones he had encountered were just fodder. He remained vigilant at all times. After all, in this wargame, he was more like the challenger. After figuring this out, Ron took a deep breath, calming his previously surging emotions once more. As for the decapitation operation he had planned before the wargame, at the very least, it was absolutely not suitable for the current situation. With the mobility of the shinobi prosthetic, the adventurers before him absolutely could not stop him. But if he chose to withdraw, the pressure from these adventurers would ultimately fall upon Makoto. Decapitation. Cut off the limbs first, then the head, shouldn't that work just as well? With the powerful recovery effect of the healing gourd, Ron could accept non-lethal injuries. He did not continue using the previous combat method. After drawing the 2 short swords tied to his legs, he gripped them in reverse hold. Losing its support, the greatsword Great Fortune crashed toward the ground. With a loud clang, it drew the attention of the Apollo adventurers. Immediately after, they saw a figure erupting with astonishing speed, launching into a charge. He was not fleeing. On the contrary, like a firefly flying toward a bright flame, he advanced toward the light, his heavy steps striking the ground and bursting into sharp, rapid cracking sounds like a marching stomp. This guy is definitely insane. Stanley's eyelids twitched violently. The other adventurers standing not far away had already raised their bows and crossbows, releasing bowstrings and pulling triggers toward Ron's swiftly advancing figure. Whoosh! Whoosh! Arrows tore through the air. Facing the assault of the Apollo Familia's adventurers, Ron made no attempt to dodge. Thanks to the true essence possessed by the Ashina Mushin Ryu, what appeared to ordinary people as speed too fast for the naked eye to catch. In his eyes, he could clearly capture the precise flight trajectories. After halting his steps, relying on the instinct honed through long-term physical training, he repeatedly raised his arms, swinging his short swords to deflect the arrows. Clang! Could they be more insidious than the imps in the dungeon that hide in dark corners and fire cold arrows? However, the counterattacks Ron carried out by instinct looked, in the eyes of the Apollo Familia's adventurers, leisurely and composed, as though he were strolling through a courtyard. Deflecting arrows with bare hands. Is that something someone at this level is supposed to be able to do? Stanley's pupils suddenly contracted. If one prepared in advance, dodging was not difficult, but who would dare to directly parry them with a weapon? With the slightest mistake, the arrows could directly pierce through the completely unprotected Ron. Either he was a madman. But Stanley felt that it was more a case of Ron being utterly confident in his own strength. Only now did he finally understand why Hestia had accepted the wargame. And in the instant he lost focus. Ron's figure had already charged in front of him. Facing that extremely fast bladelight, Stanley raised his short sword to block, but what followed immediately was an irresistible, overwhelming force. Buzz! At the moment the weapons collided, the metal short sword itself let out a wail, unable to withstand it. He only felt his arm go numb, and then Ron lifted his leg and kicked fiercely toward his chest, making him feel as though his internal organs were about to shatter. Blood uncontrollably surged out from his throat. Stanley's consciousness gradually faded. If he had the chance, he truly wanted to grab Hyacinthos by the collar, drag him before Apollo, and demand an explanation. Fuck! This is the LV-2 adventurer you were talking about? At the same time, having received another order from Daphne, the Apollo Familia's adventurers had already circled around another street and arrived at the abandoned church where Hestia was located. It could be said to be utterly unscrupulous. But the final victory condition of the wargame siege battle was to seize the token in the opposing god's hand, the hourglass that recorded the countdown. As long as they could win, who would care about the specific process? Over there. The bell tower at the top of the abandoned church, that's definitely the goddess Hestia. I've seen her at the weapon shop. As long as we take the hourglass token from her hands, the victor can only be us. With two battlefields open simultaneously, the situation was not optimistic for the Apollo Familia. Miller, who had the largest number of members under his command and strength close to LV-3, was being blocked by a strange elf. The vanguard had been effortlessly swept aside by Ron. And their task was to launch a surprise attack from the rear, where the Hestia Familia had made no defenses at all, and ultimately secure victory in this battle. However, as the adventurers in Apollo uniforms approached the abandoned church, they were noticed by Makoto at the top of the bell tower. She did not rashly launch an attack. The reason was simple. She was worried that she would be unable to resolve them quickly enough, allowing any fish that slipped through the net to threaten the goddess. Only after confirming that there were fewer than 10 Apollo Familia adventurers did the girl look toward Hestia, who was standing by the window, her tone relaxed. Lady Hestia. I'll go deal with some Apollo Familia adventurers. Hyacinthos was not present. For her, that counted as good news. After all, having just advanced to LV-3, and after being thoroughly drilled by Miss Rio yesterday, her hands were itching for a fight. Makoto's figure was exceptionally nimble. Using footholds along the rooftop, she quickly arrived at the entrance of the abandoned church, which was also the only access point to the bell tower at the top. She looked toward the Apollo Familia adventurers who were eyeing her like tigers stalking their prey. If she could not obtain that sense of shock from Ron, then she would obtain it from other adventurers. At the very least, let her feel a bit of accomplishment after breaking through to a new level. Immediately after, the girl drew the katana at her waist with both hands, her tone filled with composure. The spirit of Bushido from our Far East. Before battle, one must exchange greetings. You should know me, Hestia Familia's Yamato Makoto, now a LV-3 adventurer. Please take care of me. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Chapter 123, Chapter 123, the youth still borrows a long spear to flaunt his flair. 1,415 words. Combat requires a price to be paid. Especially when facing the encirclement of numerous adventurers from the Apollo Familia, they were ultimately not mindless monsters that only knew how to charge blindly. After their brief astonishment, as one of Aurario's mid-tier familia, the combat discipline displayed by these adventurers was by no means poor. Even after Stanley completely lost his ability to fight, they did not scatter like birds and beasts because of it. Instead, following the exploration experience of the dungeon, they formed up in squads. The vanguard held heavy shields and knight swords, maintaining a sufficient safety distance. However, the long-range methods they guarded consisted only of bows and crossbows. After all, magic in the eyes of lower-tier adventurers was an absolute rarity. The situation Ron had worried about was indeed exactly this. The surprise attack had failed to produce the effect of startling a flock of birds. Instead, the members of the Apollo Familia quickly formed an encirclement. His gaze swept across the crowd before him. The advantage of possessing two character save slots lay precisely here. Tarnished. Almost forgot. I suppose I can barely count as a magic swordsman. He sheathed the rapier, locking his target onto the adventurers who had raised their bows and crossbows, as well as the heavy shield warriors standing firmly in front, prepared for battle. Magic that required no chant. This provided Ron with more than enough methods to break the deadlock. To avoid being treated as a live target, he stepped forward in a sudden dash. This time, his target was the unfamiliar warrior holding the heavy shield. As his mind drew upon it, the magic power within his body gathered toward his left hand, azure light continuously condensing in Ron's palm. Seeing that Ron intended to break through, the LV-2 adventurer wielding the heavy shield showed no retreat whatsoever. Only his gaze could not help but be covered with solemnity. Trying to get past. At the very least, you'll have to ask me first, kid. The unfamiliar adventurer smashed the heavy shield onto the ground, producing a solid, muffled thud. He was fully aware that Ron's strength was absolutely not something he could confront head-on. Therefore, he focused entirely on defense, leaving the offense to his familia companions. However, Ron had no intention of engaging in an attack and defense struggle against rotten meat. Looking at the heavy shield taller than a man, he tapped the floor with the tip of his foot, stepping onto the shield's surface and leaping upward. Meanwhile, the magic continuously condensing in his left hand was about to reach the limit of its charge. Magic power constructed snowflake-like crystals devoid of any temperature. Their gleaming radiance was extremely dazzling. With a swing of his hand, Ron sent them shooting straight toward the crowd. Ash of War, shattering crystal. The azure brilliance carved a dazzling streak of light across the overcast sky. Wah! The sudden magic directly caught the Apollo Familia adventurers present completely off guard. Just as its name implied, it was a large-scale crystallization attack that burst apart explosively. Against mutated monsters, its effect might be limited. But when used on adventurers whose strength was below his, it was an extremely lethal area of effect method. The magic that exploded outward into countless filaments, even if one wore a full set of defensive gear, was unable to withstand this all-pervasive, penetrative strike. Without paying attention to the wails spreading across the ground behind him, Ron once again cast his gaze toward the remaining adventurers. His eyes swept calmly over them, yet on their bodies he sensed the emotion known as fear. He suddenly laughed, offering what could be considered the most benevolent reminder: you can choose to knock yourselves out now. If I make a move, I won't be able to guarantee I'll hold back. Noticing the magic once again condensing in Ron's hand, requiring no chant whatsoever, and their familia companions, who looked like shattered porcelain bottles, their bodies continuously pouring out blood in a miserable sight. When facing this adventurer from the Hestia Familia, they exchanged glances, fully aware that if they continued fighting, they absolutely would not escape this outcome. They had joined the Apollo Familia because the Familia's overall strength was decent, and the god Apollo was willing to invest resources. But after the emergence of Hyacinthos, it had already been a long time since they had lost the god's attention. To put it bluntly, their monthly Valis salary was only that much. Who would risk their life for this? Not to mention that this wargame had already developed to this point. So many adventurers had failed to stop Ron. Can we really win? This thought surged into their minds. If the wargame were lost, the Apollo Familia was destined to be disbanded. In such circumstances, why bring suffering upon themselves? Most crucially, the gap in strength was laid out plainly here: defeat was an irreversible outcome. Crack! The one who first broke the atmosphere was a young adventurer who tore off the emblem at his arm symbolizing the Apollo Familia, then left without looking back. Seeing this, Ron ceased the mobilization of his magic power. Compared to dealing with miscellaneous underlings, the adventurers stationed within the Apollo Familia were the ones he truly needed to pay attention to. That would be the real hard battle. The core members cultivated as confidants, sworn to serve the god Apollo unto death. He fastened the greatsword Great Fortune to his back and once again advanced toward the direction of the Apollo Familia. Only when he reached the bustling street district. Looking out across the area, this stretch of street was gathered with quite a few adventurers from various Familia factions. It seemed they had noticed Ron's gaze, as well as that crushing battle. The noisy discussions instantly fell silent. Many of them had participated in the betting pool for this wargame, so the looks they cast toward Ron were somewhat complicated. One after another, they consciously stepped aside to make way. Yet one figure stood out as particularly out of place. Dressed in a leaf-colored maid uniform, the foolish cat girl squeezed out from the crowd with a long spear in hand. Her eyes quickly locked onto Ron. In yesterday's instruction session, he could barely be counted as her half-day disciple. Anya had wanted to join in the excitement, but was sternly refused by Ryu. No matter what, she wanted some sense of participation, letting Ron use her own weapon to take part in the battle. That could also count as a kind of participation. The foolish girl's face carried a bright, energetic smile. Without caring whether he knew how to use it, she threw the long spear toward the boy on her own initiative. "I'll lend you my weapon. Do your best, meow." The foolish cat girl was just like that, but she was indeed very cute. Ron understood, behind this wargame, not only were countless adventurers watching, even the gods of Orario were no exception. Since that was the case, if it could not be concealed, then why not fight to his heart's content? Facing the long spear Anya had thrown over, he reached out and caught it. Relying on weapon mastery, he dispelled the force of the weapon's downward momentum. With one hand, Ron playfully traced a magnificent flourish of the spear. The spear tip lightly pressed against the ground. As he advanced, it left a clear scratch across the stone pavement, along with a sharp sound that seemed capable of piercing into everyone's hearts. Silence filled the scene. Deep within the boy's heart, the hot-blooded fervor that had been sealed away after being tempered by the realities of his previous life now gradually surged forth. In his eyes, there was only composure. Even if, in this wargame, aside from those familiar friends, no one believed that the Hestia Familia could win, then now Ron only wished to prove it to everyone. Then, allow me to present the Apollo Familia with its destined end. Even though he stood alone. The boy's figure advancing without hesitation, spirited and resolute, left upon the hearts of the many adventurers present a memory that would be impossible to erase for the rest of their lives. If one truly had to describe it, it would probably be. The youth still borrows a long spear, to flaunt his flair. I will post some extra chapters in Patreon, you can check it out. Patreon.com/TitoViller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.